Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Cyber Smart Conversations with Harsha. I'm really excited about today's guest, and I'd like everyone to welcome immediate past president of IREM, Cheryl Gray. Most recently, Cheryl served as head of special projects at Quadrille, providing strategic leadership and support of initiatives that enabled Quadrille to successfully achieve operational goals. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Harsha.
And this is one of the questions I ask all my guests about their career path.
It's been a long one. It's 41 years this month that I've been in real estate, a long journey, but I think probably most relevant for your audience today is several years ago when I initially moved from Bental Kennedy to Quadrille. It was evident through the activities of the industry at the time. This was, late 2016, moving into early 2017, as to where the industry was going relative to smart buildings. And what intrigued me about that was when I think back to our journey in the industry, as many have heard me say, is sustainability was something that was emerging, say 20 some odd years ago. And smart buildings seemed to be the next thing that was starting to impact our industry. And as a result of some research that I did in those early days at Quadrille, I spoke with our C-suite and looked to create a department that actually could help our property management teams implement things around technology, smart building strategies for our property and the portfolio. And it was quite extensive. That was including asset classes, industrial, office, multifamily, as well as retail. And through that journey, obviously exposed me to many of the facets of implementation of these strategies. And most particularly, the one that caught my attention was cyber risk. And it's not something that at that time was widely discussed in our industry. And as a result of that awareness and some of the research I was doing through my connections in the United States, I looked to BOMA Canada to develop something for the industry here in the Canadian market that would help all of the real estate industry cope with some of the risks that were starting to emerge. So tying it all together, we ended up implementing the digital innovation team, which we launched in 2018 at Quadrille. And, I think that was really an exciting opportunity for us to have talent within the organization that not only focused on the buildings, but something many, again, have heard me say is the challenges that we've had bringing together the operational technology and the information technology. The exciting part as well, while this was going on, was I was moving into the officer role as president-elect in 2019 at IREM, and then the international president in 2020. And as a result of that role, I was able to connect with many of our major firms and members across North America and around the globe, but also work closely with our technology advisory board. So my focus the last 3 years has really been on technology and its impact on the commercial real estate industry and all of the risks and opportunities that come with that.
Yes, and 41 years, indeed a long journey. And your passion to make a difference in the real estate is unbelievable.
Well, it is something that I do embody in everything that I try to do. I think that the exciting part of real estate and real estate management in particular is, it's a constant journey. When I look back over the decades of how we've managed and what our practices are, the technology that comes with those buildings, the infrastructure, just the way we manage, it's never the same day twice. I think you'll hear most property managers say that, and that is something that's always excited me, and there's always a better mousetrap, right?
Yes. And today's session is about the importance of cybersecurity in real estate. Like you said, few years ago, the idea of cyber threat wasn't really on the mind of building owners and managers. And when we used to talk about security, we always consider physical security, protecting tenants, controlling building access. But as the technology has become more advanced in the building operations, Protecting building systems and occupants for cyber threat is now on the agenda. So, what are some of the gaps in terms of technology adoption is there in the industry, and where are we today with respect to where we need to be?
Well, I think, I would broaden it to say that cyber risk is just one aspect of where we're going with technology. And it really brings about a whole new layer that I don't think we would have considered 5 or 10 years ago. When we were looking at buying systems, we were looking at functionality for the property, whether it was a building automation system or a lighting controller, security, CCTV. So the challenge has really been that, now we bring in this layer of technology, and we've almost had to revolutionize ourselves into becoming our own IT departments. And I think this is one of the gaps we still have today, in that historically in the industry, what we do see is our IT departments tend to focus on what I call the enterprise, the mothership, our accounting systems and all of those big legacy systems you use, modeling, forecasting, versus the operational technology, which is the buildings. And when you think of what you learn to be successful in IT and what you learn to be successful in operations of a property, those two skill sets are now having to come together, but are coming at it from a much different perspective. So I think I'd identify that gap as one that, while we're starting to see it close, there's still tension. There's still that, lack of knowledge on both sides. And I think we all know, if we're from the building side, that the systems are so disparate. They're all installed separately. They're all separate vendors. The integration is another gap, and that's something I'll talk about in a moment with reference to a recent survey we did at IREM. And then the final piece that I would say is, bringing together of the IT and the OT, obviously the skill sets. And I look back at how we train building operations or property managers. One of the things that we really need to do, especially on the property management side, is be able to ask the right questions. And I think that in order for us to do that, when you're picking technology and you're thinking about compliance issues, privacy is one of them, cyber risk is another, functionality, cost benefit analysis. So all of these complexities, I think, are coming together for us in a way that we really didn't look at, say, 5 or 10 years ago, as I said.
Yes, and like cybersecurity threats are becoming increasingly common throughout all the industries. And now real estate is also at risk. And like you said, the IT and the OT, these two separate pillars now need some kind of mixing, like implementing the policies that IT has in on the OT side. Because as the building systems are becoming increasingly connected to the internet through new technologies and smarter components, HVAC, lighting control systems also increase the chance of cyber threat. As simple as an unauthorized user could find a gap and compromise the Internet of Things devices and the building systems that are connected to the internet. So where is the
Absolutely.
yes? So where is the industry on the property cybersecurity? And in terms of issue, what do you see as the main issues that property operations face when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, I think, as we've had discussions in the industry work group that we set up with BOMA Canada to create those cybersecurity guides for the industry, I think the one thing that we need to be looking at is, what do we have in place in our buildings today? And it's really difficult when you don't have an inventory. And that's not something that is common that most firms would have had, say, a few years ago. The other thing that layers on is, not only do you have existing systems, which tend to be in place for quite some time, but you are bringing in new systems, and I'm talking more systems than IoT, say, for the moment. Now you're bringing in new systems. What are the guardrails that you're putting into place with reference to those systems? Because if you look at most procurement documentation, we're starting to see emergence where we're asking better questions around the technology and just not the system itself. And then the final piece to that is, how do you protect yourself with what is and what's coming in the door? And that is really a partnership with vendors, which I think we could be doing a better job of in the industry overall. I think they're challenged a bit with some of the questions they're starting to see us ask, because a lot of them are selling the systems and those are our main contacts, but they're not as familiar with the technology side. So that procurement becomes really critical. And then taking a look at what you have is, I think, most important. And it was interesting. I think a panel that I sat on not that long ago and listened to in the fall as well, is that it's not necessarily, we used to talk about the ransomware and the kinds of things where things could be shut down, but there's longer term, larger implications where some of the hackers today aren't going in for that. They're going in to try and mine for other data, or how you're connected to perhaps the enterprise system, which may contain personal or sensitive information that could impact the company or impact your tenants that may get into information that you're storing on your systems. So then you become at risk for, what's your liability in that case, what's your reputational risk. And as we've talked about, even at the BOMA Canada forum, having the support of Marsh, cybersecurity for the buildings is not really a product yet that is available. There are other aspects of your insurance that may help you, but ultimately you can't go out and buy a cyber insurance policy for a property. You can for your company, but how do you manage that? So there's a lot of risks. And I think the final point I'd make that I know is really emerging just because of a recent project I was working on at Quadrail is privacy. And there's no question, we've seen it in the news. Certainly COVID has exacerbated that, as we're all working remotely. We're all, using our own personal technology. We're trying to do things with less touch points. So we're introducing IoT, and we're getting a lot of information about people. So, the regulations in Canada, and I think even in Europe, GDPR is looking to tighten. So how do you protect yourself from that and make sure you're complying? So cyber is really not just about what you might traditionally think is, oh, I need to worry about, I'm going to get hacked and get shut down. It really is a broader enterprise issue that originates with the buildings. And that's where you've got to have a strong partnership with your building teams.
Yes, and as you said, lack of visibility to assets in a building.
Correct. Yes.
Because if you don't know what's there in the building, you don't know the risk.
Correct. Yeah. And a lot of times, as I've shared in, other seminars, I think CCTX, who we've worked with obviously at BOMA, I don't know that anyone is out there targeting commercial real estate per se, but as he said, and it's worth noting, they're not looking perhaps at any particular type of industry. They're looking at if they can find an open window, hence, an unprotected, no firewall, and they can get into your building, they'll explore and see what there is. And they may be in and gone because there's nothing of value to be found and you have no idea. So even something as simple as password protocols or internet connections without firewalls are really important. And I think what triggered me for this whole journey was I attended a session in New York back in early 2017, and I was listening to the head of IT at Boston Properties, and he was telling us in his due diligence protocols, working with his asset management teams, when they go in to look at a new asset, part of their due diligence is actually assessing the cyber risk of that building. And he was telling us about a $400 million portfolio that they were purchasing, and they had gone in, and one property had 40 inputs into the building on internet connections. Only one had a firewall. And I, never, it just triggered, like, I've never looked at it from that perspective. You just sort of trusted the vendors that were putting it in. You didn't put that as part of your protocol. So it's a lot of challenges around the complexity of it. I think that people get caught up in a very narrow view, and that's something that I would say we need to be careful and cautious about.
Yes, and this all leads to education, the cybersecurity awareness. And the biggest challenge is educating the property management teams about cybersecurity and the risk of connected building systems. Even during assessment, many times we have seen unlocked computers that controls the building operations, passwords on sticky notes in operations room. Even when a vendor leaves and the system is no longer in use, the system is still connected in the operational network. So the role of facility team I know is to run smooth building operations, but as the building operations are becoming sophisticated and streamlined with technology, educating the facility team is now important so that they assess and they report the risk. So what type of programs should a building have to improve awareness and knowledge in this area?
Well, I think, for the most part, what I would say is I think that from a system standpoint, the industry's awareness is far greater than it was. So I think most building operations teams are more aware and following better practices, even in the absence of probably a company policy. I would say that most firms are now looking at this and are doing much better from a system perspective. I think where I would still say that we have some risk and is around procurement and implementation, especially with IoT. That vendor who comes in, and sells you the sensors and they'll do these great and wonderful things and they're very cost effective and it sounds like a great idea. It's within the purchasing parameters of that building team, and in goes that system. Or an opportunity where a vendor comes to you and I have, this online reporting and, or this emergency protocols. And we go out and we implement these things and they're adding technology to the building in a very ad hoc way. And we're not understanding where the data is going, who owns the data, what's the security protocols, where are they storing the data, what is their cybersecurity protocols. And I think that's where the risks are starting to exacerbate where we're going with COVID, because we have seen the industry really rapidly deploy no touch technology, HVAC improvements, as we've been focusing on the health and wellness of our occupants. Apps that we're introducing where, we need to be sensitive. Are we doing any, GPS kind of tracking? Now we have some privacy concerns that we need to address. So I think that that's where the legacy systems of buildings, i.e. automation, lighting control, et cetera, are in a much better place than they were a few years ago. No question, there's still work to be done. But at the same time, we're layering on a lot of other types of technology, virtual leasing. Think of all the things we've had to adapt to relative to the impact of COVID. How are we vetting those, and how is the enterprise of the properties looking at these things before they get put into the buildings? Because that's where I see vendors are lacking some discipline in being upfront about that. So if you don't ask, you don't know. And or you are asking the right questions but you're not validating them, and then an issue occurs later. So my hope is, because of these kinds of conversations and things that BOMA's been doing, certainly things that IREM has been doing to create that awareness, is leveraging. There's a lot of knowledge out there in the industry. It's just making sure we share it and we collectively move forward together, because it's not a proprietary issue to any of us. It's industry wide.
Yes, and as the real estate industry grows, the cybersecurity will continue to be a primary consideration. And we have seen the adoption of technology, how it helped owners and facility team to understand occupant needs and behavior. So definitely these IoT devices, analytics platform, connected systems, but they should be viewed as a long-term strategy to drive multiple goals like saving operational cost, increasing building efficiency, tenant retention. So, what are top three areas to include in digital innovation strategy?
Well, I think, and I referenced it earlier when we were talking about this, Deloitte puts out a commercial real estate outlook, and PwC, those are the two that I follow the most closely. And I think that, what has been identified is that, this digitization of, of companies is certainly accelerating. But most real estate executives and most real estate firms don't feel that they've got the resources or the skill set. The prioritization, when you think of the unusual circumstances that we're in today, the one that I think I liked the most was PwC, who really said, they had, I think it was over 2,000 in their 2021 outlook, that the three things that are going to drive them to invest is really taking out inefficiencies. Everybody is focused on costs these days. So anything that will eliminate an inefficiency that will become more predictive versus reactive. So think AI, I think we're going to see a lot of that. The other thing that they've also identified is anything that will really have a cost benefit analysis. So it may not be something that is a benefit of financial, but it could be an occupant perspective. And if you think of the office sector, bringing people back into the office. So touchless technologies that will make people feel safer and more comfortable in the work environment. So those kinds of opportunities, I think, will be foremost. People talk about, making bigger investments. What I found interesting around the IREM survey is there's still a lot of focus at the enterprise level. And when you think about real estate and its inherent operation with all of these different sort of satellites called buildings that collect information and documents, document management has been at the forefront. And that plays to digitization, it plays to cybersecurity, who has access, but it has been the number one in the IREM survey the last couple of years. And certainly the other two that we're starting to see emerge, and we do have an innovator in residence at IREM, the chatbot. There's a lot of opportunity. While there's not the human interaction, but we've had to go to a lot of self-serve opportunities. Even in residential multifamily, we're seeing you don't want someone coming into your apartment or your townhome to do a minor, renovation or minor maintenance item. You may want them to be able to tell you how to do it so you can look after yourself without having someone come in. So how do they learn that? So you're trying to find ways, I think, to operate more efficiently. But I think that the impediment will be in the short term. I think it will be around the costs will need to be very carefully considered as we're all struggling with the impact real estate has taken in all of the sectors, probably with the exception of industrial, which seems to be doing quite well. But there has been a big impact with COVID, and we're not seeing it ebb anytime soon. They keep telling us the light's at the end of the tunnel, and I believe that, but I think we're still quite a ways out from seeing the impact of this subside.
Yes. Cheryl, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and your comments on digital innovation strategy are intriguing. Like, understand the cost benefit analysis, understand what the need is, and work with vendors and property teams to address them. Cheryl,
Yes,
thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
thank you for having me.
For those who are listening in, thank you for joining.